And yeah, I guess what struck me when I read the book was the sheer range of calls and things that people were going through, from blackmail to just wanting to spill the tea on the sex they had last night. It's kind of amazing. And also the lesser discussed legal battles, like the age of consent. I found that really interesting. Like there were areas of gay history I just didn't know very much about. So I love how you go off into that. I also loved how you put the experience of trans people and lesbian mothers together. I thought that was really interesting, like that pairing in a chapter, and we don't see that enough. So I really enjoyed those parallels. And yeah, I guess it was just really interesting to learn so much about Switchboard and the fact that they had 1 million calls already by 1982. So yeah, I'm excited to speak to you about it. Do you want to start with your reading?
Yeah, we can do that.
And then Adam, you're going to read a little bit later, right? Okay, I must remember.
Oh no, we'll do it together.
Okay,
Sort of,
perfect.
not one word at a time.
We could do that.
Is that right?
Please don't do that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. We'll do that. Is that
Okay, yeah, do it now.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay. We're going to share a mic, and it's a bit, it's moving slightly, so I'll try to move with it in this like fluid motion. So I'm going to start by reading the prologue at the beginning of the book, and it says, 2014, Tash. I've heard rumours. People are saying there are boxes somewhere full of fun photographs, protest banners, sexy HIV prevention posters, pages and pages of meeting minutes and call records. It's all the stuff generated in the running of a helpline that started in 1974, where I am now a volunteer. My role is to listen to anonymous phone calls from people living all over the UK. They ask me a stream of questions about sexuality and gender identity, and in return, I listen in confidence and answer where I can. It's 2014, and Switchboard, the LGBT+ helpline, is approaching its 40th year of operation. I work shifts in the phone room, drinking gallons of tea, wondering what it had been like before. The rumour of those boxes, filled with hidden voices and lost questions, proves too enticing for me to ignore. Switchboard's building has a storage area, but it's more of a crawl space above the common room, and I squeeze into it one Saturday afternoon, wedging myself among the water-stained, dust-ridden boxes, folders and files. I find stacks of papers and minutes, photographs of volunteers in chunky sweatshirts, answering phones in the 1970s, and posters stamped with the old gay Switchboard logo in black and white. Tucked behind a folder of pictures, I discover a stash of notepads, each marked with the words logbook. The spine of the first logbook collapsed long ago. Tea stains and doodles are sprawled across its cover. Half of the pages fall out onto my lap as I open it, each covered from top to bottom with dates, times, and notes. The entries were made by volunteers over the years, describing phone calls they had just taken. A teenager whose parents had kicked them out of home for dressing as the wrong gender. A lesbian terrified of having her baby taken away from her. A man arrested for chatting up another man in a public toilet. And a young person just wanting to know how to come out. Sometimes the volunteers wrote to each other. In one entry I read, they're having an argument about a double-ended dildo. What secret time capsule have I opened? Whose lives am I peering down on? Who are all these people? I can barely catch my breath. Every single timestamp note is a snapshot into the moment when a person reached out for help. I found a living, breathing diary of queer life, all of its highs and lows across the country, across time. The old logbooks date to 1975, and the records continue until 2003. These books that are falling apart in my hands contain a communal, cacophonous voice made up of all the people who have called Switchboard and all the volunteers like me who have turned up to the phone room to answer their calls. These boxes of books feel like a secret, a discovery, something censored that shouldn't be seen because why hadn't they been seen already? As I open up more and more boxes, further volumes keep appearing with more and more entries, some painfully lost to bad handwriting. The collection numbers 63 books in total. The pages are covered in traces of queer life. Volunteers have written in their reviews of gay bars, taped in flyers for political campaigns, and printed warnings of bomb threats sent to the building. They've even documented their rows. Accusations from one volunteer to another about dodging the washing up or leaving questionable stains on the bedsheets used on night shifts. I read over these notes as if they had been left for me, a smile stretching across my face. So the rumours are true. There are countless untold, invaluable stories held in the pages of these logbooks, spanning 40 years of queer life in the UK. I had no idea about what people had gone through. I'm a 28-year-old queer person who knows nothing of LGBTQ+ history and nothing of the history of this organisation that I'm a part of. And these boxes had been stuffed into a crawl space. I feel like I'm the only one who can hear these stories, and everyone else should listen up. The logbooks are a unique archive, and I need to share them. I haul out another box of books and get to work.
I'm just going to read a handful of logbook entries from those 63 books that Tash found. 16th of June 1975, caller says he has homosexual tendencies, no sexual experience at all. The guy was almost in tears about the whole situation. 7th of January 1982, a guy from Stroud phoned. Wife told him that she had fallen for a woman. They've been married for 21 years, kids, etc. He was being very supportive, but clearly upset and under considerable stress. He's been the publican of a pub with some gay clientele. We chatted for some length. His wife is going to call us sometime today or tomorrow. 13th of March 1991, a black lesbian called today. She's moved from Nottingham and is living with a straight white woman in South London. She's 19 and slowly coming out. She'll definitely ring on Monday night to speak to Femi. 19th of January 1992. Caller got cut off during the call. He's been thrown out of his accommodation because he's HIV positive and asking about legal rights. I went to get the legal file, and when I came back, he was gone. Hopefully we'll ring back. 10th of May 1997. Woman caller who dresses as a man, hopes to have sex change, but is attracted to gay men. Where can she go out? Men she is attracted to tend to go to men-only bars, clubs. Any ideas? 23rd of January 2003, a woman from Glasgow rang to find out how to go about becoming artificially inseminated. 28th of February 2003, had a 1 hour and 10-minute call from a bisexual guy today who had started off feeling full of shame and shy about expressing himself. 12th of January, 1976. Amazing, super, marvellous. A girl phoned. She's had her first sexual experience with another woman over the weekend and it was super. And she was so happy and so pleased that she wanted to tell someone about it. She was bubbling over. Gives you a bit of a sense of the range.
We've all been there.
Ring someone up.
And my poor, long-suffering friends, but
Yeah.
I can see, yeah. Okay, let's start by talking about Switchboard itself, maybe. Sorry, that's so I can keep time. So, you know, you're writing a book and people say, oh, what's the book you're writing about? Or, you know, and you had the podcast for so long. So when you speak to people about Switchboard and you mention it, what do you find that people generally know? And what don't they know that they should know?
That's a question for you.
Oh, okay. What do people know about Switchboard? They've kind of heard of it.
Yeah.
They don't know, lots of them don't know that it's still going today.
Yeah.
And we always say this, like right now people are on the phones taking calls. So that's a really important thing to let people know. But they kind of know that it was this helpline that was around, it was sort of radical. They don't know the origins of it, and I think the origin story is really amazing, and quite how it came about.
Do you want to say a few words on that?
I would love to, Amelia. Thank you. So Switchboard was, so you had the partial decriminalisation of homosexuality in England and Wales in 1967. And off of the back of that, two places, both of them had a home at Houseman's Bookshop in King's Cross. Peace House is the name of the building. And there was a Gay Liberation Front who were very, very active there. They used it as a place to meet. And also Gay News, which has become Gay Times. And that was a regular newspaper that went out. And both of them started to get an increase in calls to Gay Liberation Front and to Gay News from people saying, where's good to go out? Or I think I might be gay. And they didn't have time for that. They were writing articles and they were marching on the streets. And so the editor of Gay News, Dennis Lemon, had just come back from America, Philadelphia, where he had seen a switchboard set up. And so he called a meeting. All of this is amazingly documented through the archive of Gay News, by the way. He called a meeting to bring people together to start it. And what grew out of some of the members of the Gay Liberation Front, the sort of admin group within the organisation, who happened to be radical librarians, were the ones who started to catalogue the information that they knew. So places that were gay, or the numbers of places that they knew where to go, the numbers of lawyers who could help them if something was to happen to you. And they put these all into different index cards. And they were there that night on the 4th of March, 1974, in the room above Houseman's when the phone rang for the very first time at 5:05 p.m. And so, yeah, it's kind of an amazing thing to think about. Yeah, what the legacy of it is, I suppose, yeah.
Yeah, so people don't know, they don't know the origin story. Is there anything else you want to add that people don't tend to know?
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing to say is I didn't know about Switchboard until I was at your talk in 2019, when I didn't know you either, and you were giving a talk about the history of Switchboard.
Now we're getting your origin story.
Exactly. Tash was giving a talk about the origin, not the origin of Switchboard, but using some of the logbook entries that they had found and sort of stitched them together into a talk that they gave at Bishopsgate Institute during LGBT History Month in 2019. And I was just at that talk because I'm a nerd who does that on a Tuesday night. And I didn't know about Switchboard. I was only really a couple of years out myself and on the gay scene and stuff. And probably I had plenty of cause to ring something like Switchboard, but I just didn't know about it. And although Switchboard had done a lot, has always consistently really tried to promote itself in quite creative, innovative ways to make sure it reaches the people that need to know that it exists. Here I was, someone born in 84, someone who came out in 2014, was living in London. By 2019, had quite a good group of queer friends around me, but definitely had my issues, still do, who doesn't. But I didn't know about Switchboard, and I'm not blaming Switchboard for that. There were mechanical things and legal things, including Section 28, a law that we'll talk about, I'm sure, that stopped me from learning about Switchboard when I was a teenager, and then had a long-lasting impact on me and other people of my generation. So I think it's worthwhile just saying at the outset that Switchboard was there all this time, 10 years before I was even born, supporting people on the phones while I was growing up, supporting people when I was coming out, finding myself and my gang, but it had been held from view from me, and and I didn't know about it. So and so somewhat, I'm a member of a generation that there's a lot of people who have gone through that, I think. Yeah.
I would love to hear a bit about what it was like working there. I can imagine, we were just chatting a bit before and, or volunteering there rather, but we were chatting before and I was saying, I know someone who works there for a bit, and it was really quite emotionally taxing sometimes, but also amazing. And then we were talking about also how you get some questionable callers, calling for all the wrong reasons, or masturbating down the phone basically. But yeah, what was it like for you? Was it amazing? Was it emotionally taxing? Was it both at once?
It was amazing. Before I joined London, what was called London Lesbian and Gay Switchboard, when I joined it, I was at Bristol Switchboard, which is where I went to uni.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think that's another thing that I didn't know, is that there were these regional divisions.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, totally. There were so many, and they grew out of the HIV and AIDS crisis, basically. And lots of them lost funding from public health sources because of cuts in government funding, and because HIV isn't a problem anymore and things like that. And so many of those smaller switchboards that were all across the UK have closed now. Switchboard, the one we're talking about today in London's still going, and there's a couple of others which have turned into different kinds of services that are going in one way or another. But what was it like to before I even joined London Switchboard, I started at Bristol Switchboard, and I answered an ad for more women volunteers in Time Out, which is how I don't identify in that way now, but did back then. And I remember turning up, and it was like a Tuesday afternoon, and this guy, was very friendly, answered the door and put me in a room with a massive folder and just said, if anyone, read that, and if anyone calls you don't know the answer, just call London Lesbian and Gay Switchboard. And I was like, okay. So intense. And so when I moved to London, I just knew I had to apply, and I was so nervous. So one of the things that they do at the interview is they ask you to name sex acts between men and women and women, and to show that you're not afraid to talk about sex.
Right.
And I was absolutely fine with the sex acts between men, and I was so nervous that when it came to answering the sex acts between two women, all I could think of was holding hands. And yet I still got in. And the training taught me everything I need to know. But when it came to taking calls, what was really difficult about it is that you put the phone down and then it rings again. And so you have to be really careful to make sure you put yourself off the phone line if you've just had a really difficult call. And there's something about the intimacy of being on the phone with someone where their voice is in your ears and your voice is in theirs. It's really intimate, and it's very quickly intimate as well, and there's a trust. You are a voice of Switchboard. I wasn't Tash, I was just a voice, but I was a voice that was reaching back to a legacy that started in 1974, and you feel a weight of responsibility with that. And then you would have a call from someone who was telling you about some sex that they had the night before, which is what people like to do and talk about, because it's how you work through things sometimes. And in this one example, this guy was getting really out of breath and breathless, and it sounded like he was having a pretty good time. And so I sort of challenged him, and you challenge by using really anatomical language. And then I was like, it was one of my first wank calls. And I was like, please don't do that. You cannot use us in this service in that way. It turned out he was walking up some stairs. And so that was a really great situation for me. But, I'd put the phone down from that, and I'd be like, oh my God, and the phone would ring again. And I'd be on the phone, and suddenly I'd be speaking to this one call that I will never forget, which is a young trans kid who really, really needs to access healthcare. It wasn't, I'm okay to go on the waiting list, I'm on the wait list, I'll wait. It was like, this is life or death. And I had to sit with them on the phone and create a space where I allowed them to feel held, but know that I didn't know that they were going to get that letter. I didn't know they were going to access the life-saving healthcare that they needed. But somehow I had to create a world in which we lived for a moment in a queer future, in an imagined queer future, where the letter did arrive and they did access the healthcare and help them imagine this world that they could be truly themselves in the way that they felt was right to them. And then the phone would go down, and I'd have another phone call from someone asking for the number of the vegetarian gay group. So it's just these amazing moments to moments.
Wow, it's a lot. Did you ever receive more training than the folder? Because that is really hardcore, heavy stuff.
Yeah. So the training at Bristol Switchboard was really shoddy. At Switchboard, it was really intense, much longer. So I did 7 weeks every Wednesday night, and then you assess at the end of that, and then you go onto the phones, and you have a personal trainer for 30 or 33 hours. And then you're allowed to take a phone call without anyone supervising you. So it's really rigorous.
And when you said, on those calls I wasn't Tash, are you anonymous? Do you say your name? Do they say? Because I know in the entries of the logbooks, you've removed stuff that could identify anyone, and it is, but people can be anonymous, but is it always anonymous, or do sometimes people,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely know a sort of urban myth of someone taking a call from someone they think they dated, but
oh no.
But people ask for your name, and they'll also, one of the most common questions that we got at Switchboard that I got was, "You're gay too, right? You're like me." And that was the power of it, that you could say, "Yeah, I am, but this is about you." And yes, my name's Tash, or it's Amelia, or whatever it is that you want to say. What you're doing is you're not having a conversation with them. You're doing this really incredible, powerful thing of listening and holding space for their story. Because when we're talking and we're having a conversation with your friends or with whoever, you're thinking about, oh my God, that reminds me of this thing. Oh, I'm going to say that. And oh, this is this funny story. And you're listening, but you're also thinking about what you're going to say in reaction. But when you just listen to someone and you clear your personal experience, they feel that, and it creates a space. And within that space, I think really quite amazing things can happen.
Yeah, what an amazing skill that must have kind of given you to go through life. I know my friend did this mental health community support training course, and I just have free therapy from her. It's amazing, and it's like, I bet your friends probably feel the same way. So let's talk about the book, Adam. Obviously you have this incredibly successful podcast. Why did you decide to bring the work into a book form?
Yeah, great question. Because we are gluttons for punishment. When we were making the podcast and releasing the podcast, which was like 3 documentary seasons, we had a few messages from different people saying, that should be a book, have you thought about a book? Or there was one publisher that has now gone bust, but back then they approached us. Tash got told they should do a PhD, and we're like, hell no. I think we thought, okay, that's interesting that people are saying that. Let's hold that, and then let's finish our work on the podcast, because there was a finiteness to the archive, and therefore we knew that there was kind of a finiteness. Is that even a word? To the podcast?
Yeah.
Affinity? No. To the podcast. And so we were like, let's get to the end of all the logbooks, basically, once we've like made our podcast, and that's it. And then we'll talk about a book. So that's what we did. And I think that we're both like really big readers and writers. And by that point, I had written Deep Sniff, hadn't I? Yeah, I'd written another book. And I think we just thought, we kind of took a beat and a bit of a breath and thought, well, we should only do a book if there's something new to say, and if it's something that should take the form of a book, which is different to a podcast and audio that you're listening to, obviously. Not just because it's the written word versus the audio, but just in terms of, I don't know, how you make that and how you conceive of that as a project. It is different. So I think we thought, like, it'll only make sense if it makes sense. And what we realized when we were thinking about that was that the podcast had been this collection of people reading logbook entries and clips from loads of interviews that we had done with people that were stitched together with some amazing music and some mini reflections by me and Tash, and it was kind of stitched together like that. And what we realized is that actually it had a much bigger effect on us, and we learned a lot more about ourselves than we had anticipated, and learned a lot more about our place and our generational experience, actually, as people born into the 80s and then educated and raised through the era of Section 28. And so I think we felt like, well, we kind of got drawn into doing this history. Tash got drawn into the crawl space, then we were both drawn into the logbooks, then we were both drawn into people's living rooms with a microphone to record them, dozens and dozens of people that we interviewed. And we thought there's something meaningful about the fact that we did that we didn't really cover on the podcast and we didn't really have time to go into. So that started to feel like, okay, there is another project here, and actually there's a depth to it and a sort of like emotional intimacy that can be drawn out through writing. So that then got us over the line to saying, like, yeah, let's do a book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you said,
or let's try and do a book.
You said something like, because we're gluttons for punishment, you were joking. But I wonder, I mean, I know how it is. Obviously, you know this material so well because you've gone through the process of doing the podcast.
Yeah.
You'd think that makes it easier. to sit down but actually knowing too much or being too close to something can make it really hard.
Yeah, and also that we had to take the material that we had and reconceive of it and kind of go back to basics of like going back to the logbook entries themselves, really. The research that we had done to make the podcast, where we'd gone and read through all those 63 books and taken pictures and categorized the entries. We'd already done that for the podcast. And then we also had all these interviews that we'd done, but we had to kind of go back to all of that and think, actually, how do we make sense of this again, and how do we put all of this primary source material to use into another project?
Yeah.
And actually, what is not going to be like appropriate to include in the book, not appropriate, but like what's going to be out of scope of what this new project is, and actually where are the gaps that we didn't do in the podcast that we can now put into, as well as and then we had to do our own stories as well.
How do you actually write it together?
That
That just occurred to me.
question. Do you want to answer
That annoing thing when you're in a Google Doc and someone's in there and watching what you're doing, was it just like 3 years of that?
No, it was like having a mic that you're sharing, just passing it back and forth. I mean, Adam and I have worked together a lot, and the logbooks was the beginning of that. Then we set up Aunt Nell, the production company. So we know how to work together, and we work really well together. Our brains complement each other. With the writing of the book, we knew the material really well. What took time was working out what we wanted to do with the book, like Adam was saying, that was different. And so we spent lots of time just talking about it, almost like arguing with ourselves about what belongs in the book and what doesn't. And once we'd mapped that out with lots of paper on walls and on the floor and sort of moving everything around, we each took it in turn to write a plan and a structure for the chapter, and then we'd pass that to the other person, and they would then give notes and change that. Then it would go back, and then one person would start writing it with sections where we'd say like, oh, Adam, I feel like you need to write something here about your experience, and pass them back and forth and back and forth. So
Well, something I noticed is that you made so I just put a book out, and Adam's in that book. It's called Sex Club's Descent, and Adam wrote this beautiful text about sort of voyeurism and erotic photography and sort of the importance of that. I'm not summing it up very well. It's really good.
No, it's funny. It's about me going to a sex club and giving 2 blowjobs at the same time. And
fancying the photographer that was there. But it's sexy.
There's a copy at the back if anyone wants to.
Yes, well, I guess the point is I decided to start that book with sex. Like, it's in 3 sections, Sex Club's Descent, and sex is the whole first third of the book. And I noticed you guys decided to start with sex too. Do you maybe want to say a bit about why that was?
Yeah, do you want to go?
I feel like you do.
Okay, because I think it was just such an easy decision. It wasn't something that we that we like disagreed on at all. It was just we knew what we had enough of a map by that point that we knew that there was going to be a chapter on sex, and there was going to be a chapter on nightlife. And there was going to be a chapter on housing / the home, and I was going to be the person to write the first draft of that one, because I had lots of things to say, and the first draft of that was about a book and book length, and I was very angry about it. That's the housing one. But I think we knew there was going to be a chapter on sex, because it is such a common thing that comes up in calls to switchboard, and like it probably quite consistently, it's one of the most common things. And we also just thought it's the start of the book, start with sex. And it's also like one of the most crucial ways that LGBTQ plus people are different from other people. It's like one of the defining characteristics. And it's not just about like the physical act of sex, it's about your gender, your experience of your gender. And so that was a way for us to like explore those 2 key components of LGBTQ plus life at the same time, like sexuality and gender identity, to just start off with that and start strong. And also, like, it just hooks people in, doesn't it? Sex sells.
So yeah, my thinking when I started with sex was I just had this kind of quote in my head from the photographer Ajamu X. It was like, many of us set out around our sexual identities, but not our sexual behaviours. And also the fact that I had a meeting with a publisher in the US about making this book, and they were like, you can't put sex in the title, and you can't have some of these like kinkier images and sex because of
That's
the kind
the
of
whole
climate of
Yeah.
Puritanism. So yeah, that was one of the reasons. What you mentioned that most of the calls to Switchboard are about sex, but why is that? Maybe Tash, you wanna like, is there anything more to say on?
Well,
what?
like, and lots of people ring up asking how to have sex. How do you have anal sex?
I guess that links back to section 28, like this
And
absolute
education.
lack of education. And also, I guess it was a more analog era. But sorry, go on.
No, I mean, I think it links back to Section 28 was a law that came in under Thatcher's government in 1988, and it did many things, but the language around it was that it was prohibited the promotion of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. No one was ever arrested or convicted under Section 28, but what it created, and it grew out of a very complex period of time, not too dissimilar to where we are right now, where you had a far-right movement, a Christian movement. There was a need for the government, the Tory government, to distract away from a crisis that was happening. You had the miners' strikes, there was a lot of union movements happening, and you also had HIV and AIDS. And so this was like a hotbed of chaos, and in swept Margaret Thatcher and Section 28. But what it created was, it was really pernicious is the word that people use about it. It created this air of silence and fear, where people were really, really afraid, especially teachers and people within education or like local services. They were really afraid to be openly out or to talk about sexuality or gender identity, queerness in any way, because they thought they would lose their job. They thought that it was going to be against the law. I interviewed a friend who's called Ruth. She qualified as a teacher in 1987, and shortly after Section 28 came in, she turned to her line manager and said, we need to do something on HIV and AIDS and sex education because people are dying. And her manager, her pastoral line manager at school, turned to her and said, we can't do that, Ruth. It's against the law. And I remember still to this day Ruth's words after that, which were, what could I do? What could I say? Ruth was terrified of losing her job. This was, you've got to remember, a time where being gay or being out and homosexual, people would lose their jobs. That was a common thing that happened. So to sort of go against all of those things, it was just an incredibly complicated time.
Yeah, I think on that point of losing your job, something that occurred to me the other day, it was a talk with Donna Gottschalk, who's a photographer and has the show on, a lesbian photographer, has the show on at Photographers Gallery. And she was also saying, you know, you also have to remember specifically for lesbians around losing your job, you know, women were paid so much less than men then. It was much harder to get a job when you're a woman in the 70s and 80s. Like, there were just less jobs. And also, because you're a lesbian, you weren't going to have a husband who has high, you know, and also it may be that you don't have a good relationship with your family. Basically, it sounded like really simple stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, I didn't think of all those things, because it's a different time when we have we have better pay equality.
I was at that talk as well, which was amazing to have.
That's where I saw you.
It's great. I don't think it's on anymore. It's just about to close. Donna Gottschalk, but it's really amazing work. Look her up. But so I guess we were talking about education and sex education specifically, and not knowing these things, and a lot of questions to Switchboard, going back to the point of it, is trying to find out what we don't know, what we were not taught. And, you know, the majority LGBTQ plus people are raised by people who cannot relate to that experience. So they cannot tell you it's going to be like this. They cannot say, this is what's going to happen to you when you leave home. They can't even help you if they think that maybe you're struggling with it. People come out at different ages and go through different experiences and identities throughout their life. But a lot of what we're missing is this education, is this ancestry. And to touch on what you're talking there about women specifically, like, and the custody battles that you mentioned at the beginning, Amelia, like so many women in the early 80s to the mid 80s, 9 times out of 10 they would lose custody of their children because they were a lesbian. And what they had to do then to fight that would be to either find enough money to be able to pay for a solicitor or to get legal aid. If they were even then lucky enough to be able to get to court and have their hearing heard, they had to stand up in public and say not only that they were a lesbian, they loved another woman, and they were a mother. It was impossible for the world to hold those two things collectively. But they had to do it at a time where, like you were saying, they would lose their job. The risk of losing their job was really significant. And if you think about I didn't know about that until I was reading the logbooks. I had no idea about that until I was reading the logbooks. And so I think the questions that are common to Switchboard, even to this day now, are rooted in that lack of access to our education, to our history, to our ancestry that has been censored. Not hidden, but censored from us. And I think, that's what the real power in the logbooks are.
Yeah. I mean, when I was reading the book and I was thinking of these men arrested for cottaging and stuff, one guy sort of manages to have a sense of humour about it, but actually it costs you, and again, unless you get legal aid, it costs a huge amount of money to get a lawyer and defend it. It's extremely stressful, and that's before you think about employment and actually what would happen if you were found guilty. But yeah, I guess to your point, a lot of what Switchboard did is kind of fill in gaps left by the state. And, it's individuals that are doing that and sharing these resources amongst themselves as this network and then sharing them with other people. And I think, throughout the book, one of the things the book does as well as bring to light some of these histories is highlight these kind of heroes that no one knows about because they were literally anonymous, some of them. And it's kind of giving them the flowers. But I wondered if you wanted to just maybe speak to one of the people that you were most, speak of one of the people you were most moved by that you met, or one of the just share a story of one of these heroes today that you're thinking of. Because I also know that some people are there, a lot of people who are older, obviously, that you interview because they were working there in the 70s or 80s, and some people have passed away.
Should I talk about John or Ruth? I don't know, I'm so torn. It's a really hard question. There's two people who jump to mind. One, Ruth, who I mentioned earlier, who was a Switchboard volunteer, was a volunteer when I joined, and then I found out that she was a teacher. Through we've become really good friends, and through the interviews that I've done with her, through for the podcast and then the book, in those interviews, Ruth told me about being a teacher and how hard it was, how she felt like she couldn't be herself, and she hung her head in shame years later, because she was like, I haven't thought about this in so long, Tash, it's really hard. And she told me how hard it was for her to be able to not support those young queer kids in her classes who she could so clearly see were gay, and just gently turn away from them. And through that conversation, I was taken back to what happened to me at school when I was 15 or so. I came out or understood that I wasn't straight quite young, and I was, had so much teenage bravado and all of that stuff. And there was this teacher who joined my school when I was in year 9 called Miss Morgan, who was the PE teacher, my hockey coach. Stereotypes are alive and well for a reason.
I literally have this exact same story, by the way.
And I remember her joining school, and there was something about the way that she used her hands. Do you know what I mean? It's just what is that? And there was also a history teacher called Miss Zmith, who was young, and they lived together, they spent a lot of time together. And one day I walked up to them and said, you guys are gay, right? Like me? And I sort of bounced, I think, now I think about it, the memory. And they turned to me, Miss Morgan specifically, turned to me and she said, no, Tash, why would you ask me that? Why would you say that? No, I'm not gay. I like men, which was a strange thing to say. But no, why would you say that? No, I'm not gay. And I was really taken back by this. I was really struck because I felt, I was like, but you are though. Do you know what I mean? But I also felt shame. I felt shamed and I felt angry. I felt silenced. And anger is something that, I think probably that is one of the points that drove me for a very, very long time in my life until my early 30s. I was very driven by shame and anger mixed in together. And I guess I felt like a real amount of rejection. And then suddenly I'm there listening to Ruth all of those years later, and she's telling me what it felt like to be a teacher who had a kid like me come up to her and say, "You're gay too, right? Like me." And suddenly, for the first time, I was thinking about how the teachers had felt. And through these conversations, Ruth and I became the pupil and the teacher that we never had. She was the teacher, finally, able to answer me and support me, who couldn't all of those years ago when I was 15, and I was the pupil that she never got to connect with and support. And through that conversation, we built a really amazing bond, and then I ended up reaching out to my teachers. And spoiler alert, they're together, they're lesbians. They live together, they've got a dog and a cat and like 2 kids, and spoiler alert, like Mr. Med, my French teacher, was the sperm donor. Like, it was this whole thing.
What?
Yeah, I know. And then I ended up going and staying with them for a night back in Plymouth where I grew up, and spending the night under like this minion duvet in the spare room. It was so weird.
Staying at your old teacher's house is so weird.
It's so weird. It was so weird, but kind of amazing. But also not the conversation wasn't easy, and you can buy the book and read it to find out what happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's probably one of the most amazing moments and healing moments that I had in doing the work that I had no idea about. Right, I just sat down to listen to Ruth and ask her some questions. Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah, I guess I'll talk about Richard Desmond, who is one of the kind of recurring characters in the book. Richard tried to volunteer for Switchboard when he was 16, and he sort of did join, but he was just very excitable on the phones, and he was just very, very out and gay, proud teenager at 16, very precocious and loud and excitable.
What year is this?
Oh yeah, good question.
Roughly.
Early 80s.
Early 80s.
Early
He's
80s.
in his 60s now.
Yeah, he's in his 60s now, so
He's
probably.
still equally excitable.
Yes, he is, yeah, and chatty. So he was just the kind of gay teenager that was like, he was going around having sex, and he was having sex that he wanted, and he was going to the gay teenage group, joining like a gay youth club that existed, and also was like, yeah, okay, Switchboard's a thing, I'll get involved in Switchboard as well. It says gay above the door, I'm in. But they actually, his dad was not happy about this, and also he was getting a bit too excitable. So Switchboard was worried about what the dad might do, and also worried about Richard's call handling skills or lack of. And they said, you know what, go away for a couple of years and come back. You know, we'll have you back, but you need to sort of cool off a bit and maybe learn some stuff. And anyway, in that time, he sort of in a way didn't take no for an answer, because he was like so gay and so like, well, there's stuff that needs to be done. And so when he heard that some lawyers were looking to challenge the unequal age of consent in Britain, and that they needed a 16-year-old or a young person who was below the age of legal consent but was having sex, they needed a young person to be named on a lawsuit to sue the government through the court system to try to challenge that law and to change that law. So he signed up for that and became the person. He was anonymous in the filing at the time to protect him, but he put himself forward to do that, and to so that was happening just as around the time that I was being born, and just coming into the world, and he was standing up for me. And other people like me, and many even people here, and so I just think that's like, it's kind of one of those amazing mind-bending things to think about, was that he knew that this was important, and he knew that it was unfair, and that I was being born coming into a world where I was going to be treated differently just because of my sexuality, and that he thought that shouldn't stand. They didn't win that legal case, and he didn't talk about it publicly because he'd been anonymous at the time. He didn't talk about it that much until we came to make the podcast, and that was when he sort of started to talk about it. And I think that was the first public interview that he gave about it. Yeah. So we did that in the podcast, and I just and then he did go back to Switchboard and volunteered for decades and decades, including mentoring you, and supporting you.
Resident Leather Queen.
And he was Switchboard's resident leather queen for many years, and he's just such a very thoughtful person. There's a lot more to Richard's story, which I won't go into now, but just that for me is one of the types of interviews that we did and people that we met that gave me a kind of weird whiplash moment of thinking, how are our lives so similar? We're both gay men, but also so different. I'm a lot younger than him, but also he was out at 16 and doing all these things for our community, and then for decades supporting our community, taking all these phone calls that we've talked about and giving people advice, all sorts of people ringing, giving them their advice. And then there's little me, not doing any of this, not knowing any of this, and then receiving sex ed at school. And I can still remember the animated cartoon figures of the lady person and the man person with rosy cheeks going at it. And that was when I was 14 or something in the mid 90s, and yet he'd been on the phones for decades already by that point, telling people like me the actual information that we actually needed, as well as standing up in it and putting his name on a legal process. So it's that thing of I'm honoured to know him, and want to give him his flowers, and we tell his story in the book, but there's this personal kind of anger and grief that I might have, and that people of my generation might rightfully have, and all of us as a community might rightfully have, that this is how it was.
Yeah, I guess I'm not so much talking about not including a 16-year-old, because I think taking advice, life or death advice from a 16-year-old is crazy. But other people were excluded from Switchboard. Did I read this correctly in the book that bisexual people weren't allowed to volunteer? Wild. Is that right for a time?
Switchboard's like a microcosm of wider society, as is the queer community, right? So you have biphobia, transphobia, sexism, racism all happening within it, and that's why the logbooks are so interesting, because it tracks that journey. So it was lesbian and gay. It was gay, then it was lesbian and gay, and there were bisexual people within the organisation. One of the early volunteers, Tom Robinson, is bisexual, and he volunteered in 1975. But there was this big drama that happened within Switchboard where two volunteers, a male and a female volunteer, slept together, and called a very similar public meeting like this one. Imagine if that had happened between me and Adam. And then, and very
it's
different
still
book.
good.
Yeah. And then they had to sort of stand up and justify what had happened.
I actually quite like this. I'm more straight, group accountability.
Yeah.
More straight people on trial.
Yeah.
No. But this is the thing. You look at some of the. I'm sorry, I'm joking. You look at some of the pictures as well, and you're like, I was reading the book, and it seems like there weren't many trans people or much information about how to advise trans people in the earlier days. There's you've got these wonderful archive photos in the middle of the book, but there's barely any people of colour in some of the photos of the whole team.
Yeah.
And so, I guess I'd love you to just say a bit more about that. To what extent do you think Switchboard did just mirror society or the LGBTQ plus community at large, or to what extent do you think it had serious shortcomings that do need to be discussed?
Yeah, probably both, actually. I think there's a privilege in being a volunteer, and also at that period of time you had the doll,
that's
right?
Interesting.
Yeah, you had the doll back then as well, which is important to recognise, and lots of the majority of people in the Gay Liberation Front and in Switchboard and lots of the other organisations were middle class, cis, gay, white men. And that's because they had, maybe it was the education, or they had the resources to be able to give up their time in that way. That's not to say that we don't need those people to do that and give up their time. But I do think that, I mean, there's no denying that there's racism, sexism, like misogyny, transphobia, biphobia, all of those things threaded into society in the 70s, 80s, 90s, noughties, all the way right up to today, right? And Switchboard was aware of it and was trying to combat it. But it's that complicated thing of the phone is still ringing and you need people to answer it, whilst also be flying the flag for getting different kinds of volunteers on the phone so that the people calling would be able to speak to someone that represented who they were. Still to this day, the charity sector and the voluntary sector has this problem, but I think now it's much more about like the privilege of volunteering, because we don't have the dole anymore, we don't have a universal wage that we can all access. So that's something that I think we need to think about as well, and that goes into a wider conversation around being paid for your work and things like that. But going back to your point, I think that to tell a story, so Switchboard's first trans volunteer is called Diana James. She is a volunteer once more, which is great, after coming back into the Switchboard world through the logbooks. And she joined Switchboard, or she got an interview at Switchboard, she's a lesbian, in 1986 or so. And in her interview, she said to them, I'm just going to tell you I'm trans. And the volunteer at the time was like, okay. Carried on with the interview, and then Diana got a phone call from Lisa Power, who was a prominent volunteer at Switchboard, a dyke who's been around for donkey's years, in her words, one of the founders of Stonewall, still here today, amazing person. She got a phone call, Diana, from Lisa, and Lisa said, let's meet up, I'd just like to talk to you about the scenario. And so they went to First Out Cafe. Anyone remember First Out? And they had a cup of tea. And Lisa said, you are exactly the kind of woman that we want at Switchboard. And so if you're up for it, please join. But know that people will come for you, and it will be difficult. But if they do, you just come to me and I'll deal with it. And Diana thought, yeah, okay, I'm going to do it. And so she joined, and promptly 4 women left. The women's group disbanded. But Diana set it up again through her own work and as a woman within Switchboard. And I suppose it makes me think about the complexity in being the only trans and first trans woman to volunteer at Switchboard, and what it takes to do that too, and to go into an organisation where you know that someone says to you, join, but people are going to not make this a particularly easy route for you. And so I think there's a lot to consider around all of these things, and a lot to be learned from these moments in time and in history, and that's why we didn't shy away from it when we were making the podcast, and we don't shy away from it in the book, because it's really important to record the hate as well, I think.
Two quick questions on that. One, what do you think helped Switchboard? Is there anything like helped Switchboard be better in terms of both how they help trans people and trans people working there? And then the second question is, you mentioned debates in the book, like quite often. They had a debate about this. Lots of things were up for debate. Was that the kind of format? Like, did they debate things as a group? You just mentioned the sort of straight sex debate. Whatever, yeah.
So I don't know if anyone's been a part of a community organisation or a volunteer-led organisation or a collective. It is absolute chaos. It is constant arguments, it is constant debates, but there is something that brings people together in that room with that passion. And it is a passion, it's a passion for, in this example, a better world, to help people understand themselves so that they can, like I was saying earlier, imagine a better, queerer future where they are who they feel like they are, right? And it's that what combines people at Switchboard and throughout history. And we've talked about this a lot, Adam and I, especially on the tour. The phone just kept ringing, and that somehow brought all of those arguments and all of those debates into reality. And it was like, you know what, shut up, let's just get on with it. And because the phone is ringing, people are calling. Switchboard was 24 hours for so many years. They had a job to do, and I think that is something that can really pull you along. But when I joined Switchboard, it was still the same, all the debates. It's like a family, it's full of arguments.
Sorry, just on that, I saw Sarah Schulman speak a while ago, and she was saying that, you know, the reason she thinks ACT UP kind of worked as an organisation, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, was because people were allowed to disagree. And at the end of the day, after so much time fighting, she said, it was like, right, you just go and do that thing that you want to do, and I'll just go and do this, and we'll all just have to agree to disagree. And the understanding that it was never, everyone wasn't going to agree. Sorry, Adam, what were you going to say?
It's okay to disagree as well, and I think that's an important point, right? Things don't move and change overnight. Progress isn't linear. We're witnessing it right now. We're seeing the rollback of trans rights where it's already happened. And that's because it's not linear, and we don't just agree and then suddenly, okay, we roll over the next day, get out of bed, and the sun's shining and everyone loves everyone. It doesn't work like that. People have to disagree with each other, but it's in that disagreement that you understand. It's like the writing of the book. It's like when you revise something, when you keep redrafting it, you're really, really working out what you think and what you believe in. And there's something I think that we can learn a lot from in the wider community, not just the queer community, around like social progression, is that it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to disagree. It's just what you do when you realise that going forward, how you look back, how you own it, and being open to challenge and debate and conversation. And I mean, not to say that like I don't agree with hate speech and things like that, right? But I do agree that in order to really understand and be convinced of a wider movement that is moving in a direction that feels like progress, you have to be open to challenge and to be challenged on that too. And through that challenge, better rights and equity, hopefully one day will come from, I think.
Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to just also answer your part about how did debates happen, because the answer is in the logbook. So I think there were meetings, obviously Switchboard all the time, but we don't see those. We've seen meeting minutes, but you just see it in the pages of the logbooks. You know, a volunteer might literally say, like, should we be taking calls from transsexuals? They're not gay or lesbian. What should we do? And then another volunteer will write in a different ink, I absolutely think we should because blah, blah, blah. And then someone else will say, no, we should just do this. And so we've seen those debates happen in the logbooks. And, you know, people call each other names in that. And then, as Tash said, you know, then the phone rings again. And they might not come to a concrete conclusion or policy about the thing that's being debated on that page. And it was just because the phone rang again. But yeah, also +1 on everything that you said, obviously.
Yeah. It's making me, just to sort of, what Adam just said then, which I really agree with, is making me think about the power of stories as well, right? Like, so many of the arguments and debates that we're having right now are about an idea of someone or a collection of identities rather than the actual human person who has lived, who loves, who feels sad, who has shame, who suffers. And when you sit down and listen to someone who says to you, I feel lonely, I feel isolated, I feel full of shame, and you strip back everything else, it's really hard to ignore that and not find humanity in it. And I think that's something that happens on the phones at Switchboard and throughout its history.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We're going to come to audience questions in like 2 or 3 minutes, so please start thinking of your questions for Adam and Tash. One last comment / question from me is, when I was reading the book, I was, you know, it touched on a lot of things that I've had in my mind about archives, because I was working with queer photography archives for this book. Obviously, you're working with the logbooks and oral histories, but there's crossover, and I think something that comes through in your book is this idea that the archive is, you know, has been a place of violence for queer people, or state archives perhaps don't hold the complexity or nuance of people's experiences or gender, or even things that are more ephemeral, like, you know, sexual encounters or emotions or whatever it is. And so I think that what the logbooks does is kind of create an alternative archive, and I think that's what I was trying to do too. More of a thought than a comment, but do you want to say anything about how you see it? Do you see it as you spent a lot of time in archives, and there are those archives that exist. Like, I think we probably both spent a lot of time in Bishopsgate, which is amazing. But yeah, there's this need to keep finding like queerer ways to approach the archive.
I've got a thought on that. And Bishopsgate Institute is just amazing. If you haven't been, go, because it's incredible. And that's why I read the logbooks for 2 years, like every Wednesday. It's just like no other archive. You don't have to book, you just turn up, right? There's no barrier. Or there are barriers, but there's no barrier in that instance. One of the things that Adam and I have been thinking about a lot throughout this entire project, and that has emerged from it, is this idea of living archives and stories and how they live and how they shape and they change us. And our friend Maya said, queer history is gossip. And it's true. And this is how our history has been held. It has not been in the state archives, and photographs are a really amazing way to think of it as well, right? Those documentary style photographs like Donna Gottschalk, taken for, when you look at that photo, it's like you're looking into your own future. It's really strange, but it's in the 1960s because it's a record of something that existed and how people lived. This idea of gossip and stories and how they live in us and live in our bodies and what it feels like to hear them, and how tonight we're all here and we've been talking, and hopefully we'll hear from you, and then hopefully you'll talk about some of the things that we've said, and they now live on in you and your stories, and they shape you and change you as you go out onto the street and meet other people. And I think this is what I like to think about, a radical way of archiving, listening, telling stories, holding space for it, thinking about ways that we can record it, like in the book, putting it on a bookshelf, saying, actually, this belongs in the archive, and we're going to put it here through an oral history record with a person's voice before it's too late, before these people die. And I always think about, when you have like flagstones in a graveyard, and they're all so soft. And I always wonder, who laid the first one? And it would have had all of these sharp edges, but slowly over time, because of all the people who've walked on it, or all of the little rats and creatures or mourners who've walked over that flagstone, it's shaped and it's softened, but it's slow and it happens over time. And I think this is maybe a way in which I like to think of archiving.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add to that. That was great. It's a poem, another poem from Tash. I think archives are great. I do think about a couple of things. Another way that archives are not great, in addition to the list that you gave, Amelia, is the way that there's a fundamental awkwardness to the fact that they're taking something, they're collecting something. And this is like a 19th century, archives are longer than 19th century, but it's quite a 19th century thing to do, to say, I'm going to take this thing and put it in a special room where people can come and look at it. And that's not an inherently neutral or pure act, is it? It's there's obviously a question of what gets selected in that way, the selectivity of that, and who's doing the selecting. And then there's the weird thing of this thing is now on display, or it's accessible to other people. But there is a tension for me, as a writer, historian, artist, whatever, of who uses archives, because I'm I want there to be things in archives, because I know that there are important things in archives, because if Tash hadn't found the logbooks and hadn't put them in Bishopsgate, they might have been chucked on a skip one day when Switchboard was having a clear out. So it is important that they get saved, because then we've made this project and now you're hearing it, and and Richard and Ruth are getting their flowers because of it. So it is complicated, this act of collecting. And so I think you have to think about what gets collected. And also I was on the phone with someone today who I was kind of pre-screening for a project that Tash and I are doing, which is into the history of LGBTQ plus doctors and dentists in the UK, and their experiences. And it's quite niche. It's just what you can get funding for, or at least that's what we've got funding for at the minute. And it's really interesting project. There's lots of really interesting things are coming up. But I was talking to this. She called it, when we were emailing, she said, I can't remember if she said I'm a visible lesbian doctor or a visibly lesbian doctor, actually. But anyway, the point was that this was important to her. and that she was included and that her stories were collected for the archive, you know, and that's right, and you know, I agree with that. But then I'm on the phone with her talking about what that will mean when she gives her interview, and then it goes into the archive and it's transcribed and then it's available. And she was saying, well, I want to tell this story and not that story, and that's fine, that's her right, obviously. But then I was suggesting the standard order that we might ask questions, which might be chronological, and that wasn't going to work for her for one reason or another. And one of the reasons was because she thought that she knew what was the most important things from her story. And I don't disagree with her on that. You are the writer of your own story, but you also have to be aware that these stories are being collected for a historian or writer in 200 years' time who wants to know what it meant to be a lesbian doctor qualifying in 1992, and might want to know where your childhood was spent and what your home life was like and what your first relationships were, which might not have anything to do with you being a doctor, but also might have everything to do with you being a doctor because it's your story. And so we don't know what that researcher in 200 years' time is going to want to do with that. Obviously, as I said, it's you include into the archive, you give to the archive what you are willing to, and that's the number one rule. But to kind of say that I think I know what is important is forgetting the fact that we actually don't know what is important, and we don't know what future historians are going to think is important. Because the people that wrote these logbooks didn't think they were important. They were just coming on shift, writing what happened on the phone that day, and then getting off shift and then shoving the logbook in a cupboard. And then, you know, Tash found it and we thought this is important. So that's just another thing that is complicated about archives and why they're so rich.
Thank you. Okay, let's go. Thank you so much. Let's go to audience questions because I want to make sure we have time. Does anyone have a question for Adam or Tash?
No questions.
It always takes a sec.
Go on.
Is there one? Is that a question at the back? No.
No.
I'm just saying that. So, oh yeah, then two hands popped up. It worked.
Great.
I was going to ask this question because I thought maybe it would be, maybe I should know before I came, does it still exist, and if not, why?
Yes, it does.
So,
Yeah.
I'm supposed to repeat the question.
Oh, sorry.
Does Switchboard still exist? And if so, why?
Or I think it was if it doesn't, why? But
If it doesn't, why?
It,
No,
yeah.
not if so, why?
It's so.
In the age of the internet, why?
Switchboard still exists. In 2024, it turned 50. It's taken over 4 million calls, and it will exist until the phone stops ringing. And I think as long as we live in a world where we have the idea of having to come out, in whatever way that means to do with your sexuality and gender identity, then it will always be needed. We're born into a world where it's still so, you know, we live in East London, especially. I live up the road, like I live in such a bubble. But a lot of Adam and my work is like travelling across the UK. And this is just in the UK, right, that I'm speaking to. And there's so much work that needs to be done. There are so many places in the UK where people don't feel comfortable to come out or to express their sexuality or gender identity. And that's because we're born into a world that doesn't make sense with us within it, and so we have to pull it apart and piece it back together so that we can understand who we are. And I think until we stop doing that or needing to, then Switchboard will always exist. I can't imagine a world in which Switchboard doesn't exist, which maybe is a pessimistic thing to say, but ultimately I'm optimistic that it will always be there.
Great, thank you. Do we have any more questions?
There was another one.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I thought, you know, it was really interesting about Switchboard getting set up originally by gay boys, and then Dykes got in on it, which was really good, and then they separated, you know, like same with the marches, wasn't it? Really a bit on and off at the time.
Yeah.
But also, a lot of that, like you were talking about, Tash, about the dodges, people didn't have enough.
Yeah.
They couldn't volunteer, they had to work and stuff. And that whole thing around, for me, you know, when I was involved in the women's movement and all the rest of it, because women were, you know, blokes were doing their stuff, and women were fighting just to get fucking some money more, a bit more money and all the rest of it. And I think some women didn't take part in lots of the lesbian stuff because of that, because there was other things going on, like just about kids and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But also class.
Yeah.
You know, wherever I worked at Spare Rib and
Yeah.
stuff.
Great.
And it was all, wasn't that great, but it was
Oh.
alright.
More on that, please.
But, you know, it was a brilliant thing, and I'm very proud to have been part of it. But, you know, some of the people there were so minted. When I went there, we earned 25 quid a week. That's what I lived on. They didn't live on that. They probably spent their night on their wine. Do you know what I mean? So it's all through all those things.
Yeah.
And I wonder that about, you know, who's choosing what to put in and who those people are. That's what I was thinking. You know, and how you work that out. You know, not being funny. Both of you are white. You know, people say about that, can't they? Whatever.
Yeah.
And there will always be something for someone to put their finger out.
Yeah.
And I'm not doing that, but I'm just saying, it is class, I always think, is quite often left out of the
Yeah.
picture.
Yeah.
You know, and for lots of us, from the women's movement and through working in collectives and all that sort of stuff, it was a massive deal. You know, and lots of people have been more educated than me and stuff, but, you know, they might be thick as a brick shit as far as I'm concerned. But they thought they were the business because of who they were.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, I don't know how to summarise that, but that was amazing. And you're right, and I think class is something that is definitely being spoken a lot more about now, but certainly doesn't have nearly enough focus when we look back historically. And it makes me think about a wider thing around biases, right? And we can apply that to the logbooks and the archive itself, because it's really hard to know who was calling switchboard, because all we have is the logbook entry. And the logbook entry is two things. It is what the volunteer has heard, so what the caller chooses to tell the volunteer. Now, if they've just had sex for the first time, you might not be hearing anything other than that in the call. But it's also then what the volunteer chooses to write down. So we've got this layering around our history and the archives, and archives especially, right, like these two have spoken to. State records, the National Archives, that's how we've been arrested, how our bodies have been policed. So it's how the state chooses to control us. And so I think that what you're speaking to is really important and really valid, and it's about looking back into history and understanding what holes we can poke in it, and also being really open to having that happen to you during your lifetime, even on like a week-to-week basis, because how else do we learn, right? How else do we evolve? Yeah.
All of us recognising that all along, like you say, whoever wrote in the logbooks they chose what bit that story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The same as you choose what goes on the book,
Yeah, yeah.
or you choose what photograph.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whatever. And from wherever we all come from, and whatever situation it is, we all do that, don't
Yeah.
we?
Yeah.
You know, and it's reflected brilliantly loads of times, and sometimes not so brilliantly.
Which is why so we're talking about how there's always an element of curation, I suppose, whether it's through a photo that gets displayed or a story that gets told. Also, we could go into this and have an amazing conversation about memory, I'm sure, and how you're remembering the last time you remembered something and never actually the root of what happened. But what it does allow for us is to look back and critique those moments and go, okay, we've got this person's testimony, how do we fill in the gaps? And when that happened within the book, we went and spoke to people who weren't represented within the organisation, who we couldn't find a call about, and tried to tell their story as best we could in the absences of it. So yeah, really great points.
I want to also add to that yeah, thank you for your point, all of the points, and just to add on the thing about class, is that we were, Tash and I mean, were the period that we were writing this book was a period where, well, it's still the same today. We both work together and separately as freelancers on different projects with different collaborators and different funds, different grants, different organizations that we work for. And this book, we were only able to do this work because we made time, which was almost entirely unpaid. We made that time. I'm not making special pleading or anything, but I'm just exposing. No, I'm just exposing the fact that like no one paid us. We got a small advance, which didn't cover the amount of work by any stretch at all. So most of the time that we spent working on this book was time when we were not being paid, and we could do that because we, in the period that we were writing the book, we had enough work from other sources that we could pay ourselves. And at the minute, like, people are asking me, like, oh, what's the next book that you're working on? And I'm very slowly working on 2 books, and I'm very excited by them both, but if I'm being honest, I can't afford to write them now in the current period because of the level of work that I have, so paid work. So I don't know what to do about that, and I'm still in a better position than a lot of other people would be who are trying to write books, you know, or do work or whatever. But I think there's another element of selection. It's not just what did we select to put in this book, or what does anyone select to put in a gallery or something. Is also like, does the gallery exist? Which books don't exist? Which books are not being written right now? Because, and that's really my point, which books are not being written by people who are raising kids on minimum wage, you know, doing busy jobs, etc., busy lives. So, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're at time. Thank you all so much, and thank you guys for such insightful.
Thank you, Amelia, and Pages of Hackney as well.
Yeah,
and
thank you, Pages of Hackney, and thank you all for coming. Cheers.
Thank you.